Very good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's uLaw webinar. In today's webinar, we're going to be talking about the topic around law office matter management or legal office matter management. So we're going to be really getting a deeper dive into matter management 101. And this particular topic is, I would say, more of a subtopic from a CPD session that we've done in the past called Everything Practice Management, that truly illustrates the obligations of a legal practitioner and the many aspects of their day-to-day business that they need to keep in mind as to utilize either a tool or a technique to manage various different facets of their business. So one such aspect or facet of that is around how you manage files, matters, ensuring that you have compliance in the back of your mind right from the get-go. Talking about the various aspects in the life cycle of how you manage a client intake, starting from that, creating a file, and how do you take it through the various different aspects of that life cycle, whether that's involving retainers, docketing, disburse, invoicement, and doing trust transfers and everything else. And what are the types of documents that are going to be involved across each component of this life cycle. Okay, so that's really the key message that we're going to be taking in today's webinar. Today's webinar is not accredited for any CPD credits yet. We're hoping to get that CPD maybe later in the year, but for now it's not accredited for any CPD credits. It is being recorded and will be available to you to consume via our YouTube channel. And I do once again request those who've joined the audio through your computers, if you would be kind enough to utilize the phone numbers provided, depending on the various jurisdictions. The email that we've sent you should have the phone numbers that you could use for a better quality. Now, every uLaw webinar has a specific agenda, and today's agenda for this webinar is to again talk about the various aspects of file or the matter management that a law office goes through. And we're going to break it down, I would say, and get a little more granular in terms of the different steps, the different documents involved, the law society requirements, as well as at the end of the day, various general ledgers, trust ledgers, journals that are involved as an outcome of the various transactions that are recorded within a specific file or a matter. Okay, so we're going to talk about how to create these matters, the various steps that you have to keep in mind, the life cycle of that matter, right, intake to conflict screening, all of the documents such as retainer engagement letters, closure letters, statements of activities, to actually closing that file and maybe even providing a settlement statement to that client. About the compliance documents, how do you manage retainers, the receipts for various different payments, whether that's trust-related or general-related, how to manage non-engagements, how do you manage reversal of invoices, how do you manage paying back the trust money or paying back money that was not used. There's very different aspects to file management or the matter management. And then we'll talk about the disbursements component. Certain files are going to require disbursements. Certain files may not have that. We'll talk about the various different types of docketing, whether that's flat fee-based, time and material, maybe a combination, maybe contingency, depending on the area of practice that you're focusing on. And moving along to how do you invoice through trust transfers, to even the analytics that you can drive out of each file that allows you to take proactive measures in working on that file or following up with that client with regards to a specific file. Okay? So it's going to be a lot of things that we're going to cover, and hopefully we spend some time at the end of the session to utilize a demo using uLaw as an example of walking you through some of these important components of matter management. Okay? So an excerpt from our Everything Practice Management CPD webinar is really talk about those professional obligations. And one of the first and fundamental obligations that you have as a legal practitioner for your management of client and file information is the whole idea of how you intake that initial client. How do you communicate your service level agreement to that client, expectations in terms of the payment, SLA in terms of the timelines that you take to respond back to a query, the expectations you have from your client of how to correspond, whether it's email communication, standard mail communication, text, WhatsApp, whatever it may be that you agree upon with that client. Okay. Starting with recording of calls and consultations during that intake, prior to even moving forward with creating a file, making sure that you do a quick conflict check. Once you've determined that you're going to move forward with that matter, clearly talking about the collateral for fees, either through that engagement letter or a retainer letter, whatever you call it. If there's a retainer involved, which is money being deposited into your trust account, ensuring that the appropriate funds are deposited into the trust account rather than the general account, especially if it's a retainer. And for whatever reason, at any during aspect or during that life cycle of managing that client and the matter, if for whatever reason you have to non-engage, either the client non-engages or you non-engage, the appropriate steps that you have to keep in mind, such as providing them with a logical closure, maybe refunding the retainer, generating a non-engagement letter with a closure letter which says that you're no more obligated to represent your client with regards to this particular file because of such and such reason, right? So that's kind of really a very high level cradle to grave, if you will, of a file management. Of course, there are many different nuances, and the devil is certainly in the details. So some of the important things to cover during the matter management, once you've actually done that client intake, created a file because you've done the conflict check, you're comfortable representing this individual, and you want to create a file because the file is that encompassing. Let's create that as maybe a folder, like a manila folder in the old school days. That's really what encapsulates all the transactions that occur with regards to that file or matter, right? Because you could have multiple matters with regards to the same client, but each file has its own nuances, information that's specific to the nature of that particular file. So if it's a POA matter, there are certain details right from the retainer involved because the amount could be different. The amount of dockets that you have for that matter could be different. That particular matter may not have a disbursement or may have disbursements included. You may even decide there are no taxes or taxes included. And it could be a situation where there's no retainer involved in that file. So each file has its own set of characteristics, and how well you capture those characteristics and represent them in a format that not only allows you to stay on top of that file and take it to a logical closure, but also prepare yourself for an audit, because certain pieces of information that you capture within that file is something that the Law Society is looking to request you to showcase to them to make sure that you've done the right things along the way, right? So in terms of organization, it comes down to, have you provided that file a unique file number, for example, or a matter number? How do you ensure that these files are unique every time you generate one? What types of tools and techniques do you follow to capture every docket? Not only is it important from an audit perspective, it's very important from a business perspective of you being vigilant enough to be able to docket as and when things happen, enter data about disbursements as and when they happen, and hopefully work towards generating invoices as and when these dockets and disbursements happen, so that you can always be faster in recognizing the revenue. Disbursement management, that's a separate CPD webinar that we conduct at uLaw. It's very important that when you do consider disbursements, you also consider the various taxes involved with those disbursement costs. Certain disbursements do not have taxes involved, such as an application fee, court fee, etc. You could have other types of disbursements that are time and material billable in nature, unit rate in nature, and of course there are others which include taxes. So if you've actually gone out and done a fax of various different papers with regards to the file, and maybe you went out to a nearby Staples or FedEx to do it, that business would have certainly charged the taxes, and that's something that you then pass along as a disbursement to your client as well. And in doing all of these various tasks and capturing the information of every transaction that occurs, you're basically building all the information and updating these files with all the information that's relevant at each and every stage of the life cycle of that matter, right? So, quick slide on file management. We talk about this in further detail in our other webinars, but really if I were to condense this one slide, the key takeaway from this slide would be to talk about the uniqueness of each file. Of course, I mentioned about this earlier on, but it's certainly important to demarcate each file, whether it's for separate clients or more importantly, even if it's for the same client, and have a structure. If you're going to be using legal accounting tools such as uLaw, of course, we provide that automatically. If you're using other tools, I'm sure they provide that as well. But if you're doing this in a manual way, then you need to ensure that you have a process to separate out these files, have a unique reference number so that you can cross-index that information the next time you do a conflict screening, right? So having a checklist for all the incoming matters, making sure that you have a conflict check done, ensuring that you're separating these files up for each respective matter, having a way for you to easily search and store information with regards to file. All of this are important things that you need to keep in mind as to whether you start off your practice or something that you've been doing for a while. And if you've been doing all of this in a perfect situation, of course, kudos to you. You just have to keep at it and ensure that you're improving that process for efficiencies as well. So one of the most important documents, that truly a legal document, if you will, that outlines the roles, responsibilities of you being a legal practitioner representing that client, is well outlined in the retainer letter or an engagement letter. We kind of talk about both these in parallel. The retainer letter kind of alludes to the point that there's a retainer involved, so trust money is being involved. You're taking money in advance. Whereas an engagement letter, of course, talks about all your obligations, but does not talk about any advance or retainer money. It basically says, as and when work gets done at the specific per hour unit rate, billable rate, or as the flat fee, this is how you would charge your client, and you expect them to pay you back for that services rendered, right? Regardless whether it's a retainer or engagement, some of the aspects that we talk about that you need to consider putting into that document as a template, if you can, is ensuring that the nature and scope of matter is well outlined. Is this a POA matter? Is this a landlord and tenant? Is this a criminal matter? Is this a divorce, a separation, accident? What is this, all right? Is it a DUI? So you really want to be able to clearly talk about the nature and scope of the matter, clearly talk about your expectation as a law firm and the client's responsibilities of how they organize themselves or correspond with your law firm. So maybe you expect your client to respond back or reply for any questions that your firm may have within, let's say, 3 to 5 business days or 1 to 2 business days, really coming down to the nature of that file. And making sure that you're following up to remind these clients that as per that signed retainer letter that they're expected to do so, because then you can use that as truly a proof of the obligation that you had signed up for. And if they don't, comply with those obligations, and of course, you have other steps that you can take based on that. It truly allows you that document to be that basis of any specific actions that you may have to take. The methods and frequency of communication, we talk about the scheduling and course of representation. Clearly, in certain files, such as POA, for example, your court date may be at a later time. So ensuring that you have a proper calendaring system, or if there's a certain type of file where you request the client to be in person at court, ensuring that there's a way that you're corresponding, communicating, and letting them know that they should be there on time, things of that nature. And in terms of method of communication, clearly talking about whether it's email, mail, WhatsApp, text, phone conversations, what is the preferred mode of communication, and what are modes of communication that you frown upon, right? Many times we see WhatsApp or text messages aren't most necessarily the preferred methods of correspondence, whereas email, phone conversations are certainly more acceptable. As part of the retainer agreement, very important for you to consider the termination boundaries. One is to, of course, for everything to fall in its place. The other thing is to prepare for the worst. So any legal document, of course, looks into that. And a retainer agreement is no exception, ensuring that non-engagement clause is well established for the purposes of both your firm as well as for the client themselves. Okay. Some aspects for you to keep in mind as you draft out that retainer letter. Of course, tools such as uLaw provide you with certain templates to begin with, which you can further improvise as you mature yourself in representing the firm. And a quick segue in terms of specifically talking about disbursements. We spoke about this, why it's important for you to also talk about this in your engagement or retainer letter, is clearly illustrating the type of disbursements that typically may be involved in that file, right? Or talk about whether it's a unit rate disbursement, whether there's any mileage that you expect to charge them, or even if you don't charge them, maybe these are specific disbursement types and charges that you would charge if it were to be involved. So you can always put that as a blanket. We find a lot of retainer letters well drafted, which has very standard text around disbursements, such as, if our legal practitioner were to travel, then we would be charging you, 60 cents a kilometer, or things of that nature. And from a law firm or a legal firm perspective, things for you to keep in mind are, based on the types of disbursement, what type of accounts do I actually use to transact and pay for those disbursements? So for example, if it's a unit rate, you can be pretty sure, and you should keep this in mind, that you would use a general bank account for your firm and not use a trust account to pay for it, right? So in totality, if it's a recovery of expense, which is really what the disbursement is, on an actual, so basically you paid for $100 for a court fee with no taxes, and that's exactly what you're recovering from the client as a disbursement, you can use both the trust account, so basically you can pay off your trust. You can either accommodate an additional $100 as part of the retainer, or maybe you need to ask them for more top-ups to that retainer later on. But you could certainly use the trust account as a vehicle to pay for that disbursement, as well as the general account. But if it's done with either a profit or a loss margin, then again, keep in mind that you should certainly only use the general account and not the trust account. Okay. All right, so what are some of the compliance documents that the Law Society across provinces in Canada request as either part of a spot audit or a regular audit that you're scheduled to have, right? Some of the documents, and again, there's a lot of other instruments of documents that are looked at, but some of the documents include a client ID verification. So, perfect, you got, John Smith as a client. The Law Society would want to know if you actually scanned John Smith's driver's license to certainly ensure that this is certainly John Smith. You looked at his face, you've got his address, all of that matches with a legal document that binds that information. Okay, so client ID verification document is actually a Law Society document that you fill out, and you can have the driver's license to supplement or complement that document. A client intake form, which pretty much captures all the information that you're gathering from the client. Now, in today's day and age, you have almost all of the law firms and legal firms having a website presence. So you could have the typical in-office documents that you fill out as part of that intake, or you could have information being filled out on your website, which you then carry forward as an initial screening document, and then you invite the client for a phone interview or an in-person conversation to further discuss that case and understand if there's an opportunity for you to work together. Either way, it's important that you have those client intake forms filled out for each of those matters. Then comes the retainer letter, and if there's a retainer involved, most certainly a receipt of the payment accepted. So if your client paid you a $1,000 retainer or a $3,000 retainer for an immigration file, for example, they certainly should have paid you in some mode. Either you accepted through a credit card payment, whether that's a check, whatever may be the case. So if it's a different type of file, maybe it's cash. In fact, if it's cash, even more important for you to provide that retainer receipt. That way, you are ensuring that you're covering all the aspects of the legalities of documenting that that transaction did occur, and then your customer also has a receipt that gives them that confidence that they've paid for it and they have the receipt. So these are something that the Law Society auditors may ask you for, saying, all right, perfect, you have these files, can you show me the client ID verification and the retainer receipt? Another piece of information most certainly that's asked for is, great that you started this file, fantastic that you've got all of this information stored, but to begin with, did you do a conflict check? And do you have a way of documenting the information around that conflict? Like, for example, when did you do that conflict? What did you decide upon the information that was presented, and why did you decide that this was not a conflict? Or in some cases, if there was a conflict, what was the next step that you took as a firm? Did you work towards resolving that conflict, or did you just pass that file along to another colleague, or did you just thank the client for the opportunity, but then told them that because of the conflict involved that you could not represent them, and of course, not engage with them? What was it? Right? Very important. That's really comes to the next step. So if you did not engage that client, was this a ghost client, which is really a prospective client who's flirting with the idea of engaging with you, but has never provided a payment or some means of retaining your service? But they have, unfortunately to you, provided you with some key information, such as name, address, phone number, as part of the initial client intake. So someone came to you, gave you all the information. They said, well, I'm certainly considering taking my neighbor to court for this fence issue that I have. I'm going to call you back in 2 days and then pay you your retainer. And then they disappear like a ghost. That's where the name came from, and then those types of clients. You need to keep in mind that you keep a tab on those ghost clients, and periodically, as you feel fit, send them the non-engagement letter which said, hey, you gave me all this information, buddy, but it's been 6 months and you haven't come back. My obligation to even look at your file or represent you ends here. Here's a non-engagement letter. Do not expect me to ever represent you in this case for now. I'm not legally obligated. Once the file does progress in the positive direction, or where you actually representing them and working on the file, of course, part of that retainer letter, you got to make it clear about the schedule of invoicing. How often do you invoice? Because your client shouldn't be shocked to see an invoice for a time period that they did not agree upon, or they don't know about. So the retainer letter should clearly state that you're going to generate an invoice as and when things happen. Or if you're dealing with corporate clients, maybe on a specific periodic basis, then we have lower clients who work with law firms or the corporate firms where they charge them on a biweekly basis. And attached with that is a timesheet or docket of all the work that's been done in those 2 weeks. Right. Last but not the least, you've got a closure letter. And of course, the end of closing that file, from a legal accounting standpoint, the Law Society would also look for ledgers and journals that correspond to this transactions across these files. Okay? Again, please feel free to use the chat window to ask any questions that you may have during any time of the session. And this is a question that's been asked quite often to us as part of that engagement with their end clients, is how often do I have to correspond with my end client, right? Depending on the nature and the tenure of that file, if this is an ongoing file, the regulators do recommend holding at least a quarterly review with your clients to talk about the situation. Just, a quick recap. Here's where the retainer is. This is how much of money has been taken out of that trust account. Here are all the invoices to support that. Here's what's still left. Here's what's still expected to come in terms of invoicing, trust transfers, etc. Or if there's a top-up that's required, that's a great logical time period to ask for that, right? That's a highly recommended touch point. If this is a much shorter stint or a file, you're going to correspond on a more daily basis to correspond back with the client till you take it to closure. If this is a file that does last for a couple of years or more, criminal matters sometimes take many years, then again it's recommended that you do conduct an annual review as well, in addition to the quarterly review, where you also outline the status of the trust and general accounts. Okay. Important documents along the way include crisp invoices and receipts for both the retainers and payments, quarterly updates around statement of activity, what's happened with your accounts and your file, what are the types of expected retainer amounts that were paid for, how much money was taken out, etc., everything we spoke about. Quarterly, you could also send a bill of cost, an aging report. So if they haven't paid you in time, an aging report often in a very subtle fashion talks about how important it is for them to pay you on time. And at the end of the year, certainly a great idea almost to send it as part of every closure letter is the settlement statement of accounts, if you will. And the last point is really something that we added in terms of a little marketing is along the way you could start to talk a little bit more in terms of take every opportunity to market in a very subtle way, making sure that your customer can remember your firm's name so that they pass it along to another friend or colleague when they need legal representation. Now, in certain jurisdictions and certain types of areas of practice, of course, there are requirements in terms of court forms that have to be filled out as part of that file management. So we spoke about all the documents and letters all related to the specific law office, so you can define what these documents should look like, the templatization of these documents. It's totally in your control. Now what we're talking about is court forms that are pretty much governed by the individual jurisdictions that govern the area of practice as well as the province. So for example, in the provinces of Ontario, British Columbia, or others, each province may have, of course, does have court forms that need to be filled out. For example, you could have a plaintiff's claim, Form 7A, I believe, in Ontario for a small claims matter. You may have a defendant's claim, depending on who you're representing. You could have landlord and tenant board forms, such as an eviction of a tenant, or if you're representing the tenant, then a claim to stay. So if it's family, then you could have a simple divorce, different forms that are specific to the area of practice, and the templatization, or the exact way in which information needs to be captured and written in those forms, depends on the jurisdiction itself. And they determine that these court forms are updated on a regular basis by the government and the bodies that govern it. Right. So when it comes to these court forms, many times what happens is the pieces of information that's required across these forms include contact information of every party that's involved in that file. So it talks about your client, what is the client's situation with regards to that file, is he or she a plaintiff, is he or she a defendant, depending on the nature of the business itself. That's why we talk about managing clients based on their type of representation within that file. Okay. So by adding pieces of information about different contacts, you can then add them as parties involved. And one of the unique features in the uLaw product is it allows you to automate these court forms once you've associated all these contacts, because it then automatically fills out these court forms, which is a unique feature to uLaw, in such a way that there's a minimal data entry that needs to be done across these court forms. Okay, so the court forms are a separate set of documents that you need to be cognizant of that are more specific to the jurisdiction and the area of practice and the governing bodies of those areas of practice. Last but not the least, as part of our analytical engine in uLaw, we believe one way of staying on top of the matter, the various life cycle stages of that matter, is always understanding where in that cycle the client is, you are, what types of numbers are being involved, is it the right time to have a follow-up. So there's many questions that come out of the data that's already in the uLaw product. So the analytics, of course, reveals those answers to those many questions, right? In terms of the aging, one of the most widely asked questions. How long has it been since the customer has paid for a specific invoice? So you generated that invoice, you did everything right from your side. Maybe the retainer letter said you got, the client's responsibility is to pay you within 30 days. Maybe it's a net 30. The aging report will tell you by invoice, by a client, when you generated it, how long has it been since that invoice was generated and you have not yet received the payment. Okay. Another really good question is around the status of the matter, both from a trust perspective as well as a general accounting perspective. So for example, at any given time in that matter, how many invoices are still pending to be generated? How many invoices are yet to be paid? How much of invoices have been paid? How much of total money has been involved? What's the trust amount like? There's so many different questions. The analytics gives you answers to many such questions pertaining to that matter. It allows you to visualize that data that's already there There's two ways of visualizing the data. One, of course, is through these charts and pivots and tables that are more business savvy in nature, where you as the owner or part of the business ownership can consume that data in a different format. The other way of visualization of the data is around the legal and the law society aspect of it, in terms of the reports and documents and the specific ways in which they expect the same data to be represented in terms of journals, ledgers, etc. Right? So what we say is, using the analytics, plan based on the information you have and be proactive in how you can approach that file moving forward. Now we come into maybe a little more different outlook in terms of today's day and age, today's tools that can be used to solve some of the problems that are part and parcel of file management or matter management. One of the challenges that today's lawyer or today's legal professional has is because you have to do more with less. You may be dealing with multiple matters, so time management is very critical. And there's various different matters that need various attentions at different times of the day. But to keep the ball rolling, for the business to be a profit business, for you to ensure that you're capturing the moment as and when it happens, you need the right tools that allow you to capture as and when dockets happen. And based on this is where we evolved the uLaw product, which originally had a web version of it, now has a complementing mobile platform along with it. And this app that you can download on Android or iOS essentially gives you the power to continue where you left off, even if you're not in your office. So you could use this on your phone, be able to dock it from wherever you are that's connected via internet. As long as you have internet, you are able to specifically go into a specific matter and be able to docket the effort, whether that's an email, whether it's a phone conversation, in-person meeting. You can actually docket it right from your phone. So if you look at our iOS version, here's a great example. You can specifically go into this family matter, right, and say, would you like to add a docket? Absolutely. So you could choose the date, enter what was the docket title, and do it right from the phone. In terms of insight specific to that matter, you can jump right into a particular file for a client and be able to really quickly go through some key analytics right on your mobile phone. So specifically for Adam Brown, you know that he owes you $1,300. In fact, there's actually a pending invoice that you should be generating at this time. So there are some dockets or disbursements that have been entered and invoices pertaining to that have not yet been generated. And you can also generate charts and pie graphs on the areas of practice in which you're making money, areas of practice where you're spending money. So you're now getting smarter as a business owner so that you're staying on top of those numbers, all from a mobile phone, right? So that's really the next step or the evolution of the uLaw product into the mobile platform. And we're going to continue investing and building more features and functionalities that in one day, hopefully we can do everything that you do today on your web browser. You can do all of that using the mobile app. We're not there yet, but we're trying to get there fast as we can. And in all of this, we continue to promote, not the product uLaw, but we continue to promote the concept of a legal accounting software that is essential for a law office or a legal office because of some of the nuances to this particular business, some of the regulatory requirements and needs of this specific business, and how a legal accounting software accommodates the various different aspects in one single platform, whether that's the need of your CRA for business ownership, bookkeeping, business accounting, or whether it's for the aspect of practice management, timekeeping, docketing, file management, client intake. There's so many different aspects to a legal business. So sometimes just an accounting software wouldn't cut it. Just the practice management software wouldn't cut it. You need something that has a combined vision of all these different moving parts in a single platform. And a well-designed legal accounting software certainly will cut the bill, would certainly make that mark, would ensure that you're doing more with less. And uLaw is a legal accounting software that's tailor-made for the legal practice with the regulations, compliance, and various different components that we spoke about, thought out and defined from scratch. Again, for those who don't know who we are, we're a Canadian legal accounting, business accounting, practice management software company based out of Ottawa. We do offer a 30-day no obligation trial for those who want to try us out. I'll be more than happy to walk you through the product, features and functionalities of it, and explore a friend as a partner if this product works for you. And we'll look forward to hearing from you if you feel interested. Now, as promised, I'll take maybe 10 minutes of your time today to simply illustrate by using uLaw as an example as to how you can accomplish all of those aspects that we spoke about the last 45 minutes. How do you create a client? More importantly, the file management, the various different documents that you have to generate along the way, creating dockets, disbursements, ensuring all of the information with regards to that matter are well documented. Okay? So let's start off the first step, really creating a client. So if you can see, as part of our client intake, let's assume that the client just walked into your office, or maybe you met him at a courthouse. You could use this right from your phone too, but I'm just going to use the web version for today's demo. I could switch this into my mobile experience, provided we have time. So let me just go ahead and add a client. I'm going to say Mr. Nishikori. And some of the pieces of information that we capture could also be very important for your firm, such as the source of contact, is really trying to understand from Mr. Nishikori as to how he got to know Roger Moore, the lawyer out of Ottawa, right? So maybe this was a family referral, a law society referral, maybe a personal referral. Okay, and of course, a correspondence address. Postal code, you can mark this as the mailing address. You can add multiple addresses if you like. Again, this is important that you capture all this information. And maybe this is the home address. Maybe this is the work address. And if you decide the work address should be the correspondence address, or the address that's also used across all correspondences, you can choose between the two. Just basically fast and easy client intake, whether that's done through the phone, using the mobile app, whether that's information coming from their website. Okay? Pertinent information captured right at that moment. So basically, the information that's stored is saved into the database, and now uLaw is preparing that contact with the next phases of the file management, including conflict screen checks, ensuring that you can docket, disperse, invoice, etc. Okay. So as you can see, as we refresh the page, for you to showcase Mr. Nishikori, in uLaw, you could have, let's assume this is a client who just walked in, giving you some basic information. So almost before you move on to creating a file, one of the first steps that you would do is ensure that there are no conflicts in representing this file. Right away, you could do a conflict screening and check if you've ever created a matter for someone like Nishikori, or even if you've come across someone like Nishikori. And what this does, again, I'm using a practice account, so there's a lot of data in it, but essentially, uLaw is scanning the entire database for any instance of Nishikori or Nishi or Mr. Osaka to give you more pertinent information if you or others in your firm have ever dealt with someone like this. Because that's important to know, right? Now, if you look at some of the documents that you can generate right away for this contact, or quick envelopes, very pragmatic use of it. It tells you clearly the different styles, types. So let's say I'm generating a DL. You can use this to print by leaving, your envelope on the printer. You could include your own logo, information about your firm, with the correspondence address being listed. Likewise, you could generate labels that you could use with your Avery printer. It's compliant with that. Include your phone number. And now you can print this against your laser printer and say how many copies you want. You could generate a source of contact as part of a compliance document. You can certainly generate the source of contact. And let's say you do it for the month of September. It's going to basically tell you the amount of clients that you've had intake for that particular month and what was their source of referral. How did they get to know the firm, right? In fact, it's one of the Law Society compliance documents. So it tells you right away 50% person referral, Law Society referral. And in fact, there's one contact, Mr. Sanjeev, who we don't know as to how he got to know our firm. Now moving along to the conflict screening report, you can see it's scanned the entire database. It's timestamped it as 6th of September, and it's come back with empty. Fantastic. So there's no conflict so far, so you feel free to go ahead to the next step. That's when you go ahead and click on this matter button to create a file or a matter. So this creates a file cross-indexed as well as creating unique file numbers. Allows you to capture the area of practice. So this could be Nishi, Corey, versus Stefan. It has quickly captured the nature of the business, a simple title. So you could use this to explain it. This could have been, Nishikori versus Stefan. You could add to this if you like, because it's free text. This could be fence issue. This could be a divorce, whatever it may be, based on the nature of the business, right? And if you noticed, uLaw does create a file number, which is unique, cross-indexed, Law Society compliant, because anytime you generate another file for the same client, you would have a totally different number, a unique number that you could use. Now, in terms of next steps, if you've got letters, you'd notice right under the matter, got various different templates, right from the business letter to master letterheads to authorization letter, non-engagement letter, conflict screening. client intake. So let's start with the conflict screening document. Automatically, we take the template that's given, pre-populate all of the information we already know. Here's where you can quickly tell the Law Society why you don't think that this is a problem. There's no conflict in representing this client. And you can attach that conflict screening document that we just created. Right? And this is something, again, there's no conflict. You did not refer someone. You did not decline it. Sign this, and you're good. You can electronically sign it and also digitally save it. You can generate other types of documents, but I'll specifically get into the retainer letter. You could do simple, elaborate flat rate templates that are available in uLaw for you to start off with. If you have your own, you can bring that into uLaw as well. Some additional samples include hourly, contingency, and specific samples around maybe POA, right, if you have that. One of the most commonly used documents or retainer letter samples we find is the elaborate and the flat rate. And you can generate this in Word, so that if you have to make some tweaks, you could do that as well. Generate templates in both PDF as well as Word. So here is a template of a retainer letter which has embedded all of the specific information about this particular file from Mr. Nishikori and Stefan. Has all the information about your firm, has information about Nishikori, and this is where you could now take this and make this your own. Okay. But it has provided previous any additional information that we already know. You can get your sign, Mr. Nishikori to sign, and you're good. Let's assume that you did accept a $1,000 retainer. As I mentioned, in the file, you should be able to now capture all of that information. So you can go ahead and hit New Retainer, capture that information as and when it happened. Tell us that you got a check 676 and you deposited it into your TD trust account. Give them a retainer receipt as part of the compliance. You can even accept that payment as a credit card payment if you like. Through our integrated partners, you can actually facilitate that for your clients where they can pay for retainers as well through credit cards. Generate this receipt, even email this receipt to the client if you have to. So this is a retainer receipt. It has all of the specific information, a retainer receipt number as well. The client information, what was it for, the details. And now you start to dock it away. Initial client meeting. Right? Bulletize it. You can make this either a flat rate, or you can toggle this to be a billable time, or you can just charge by the hour. You could specifically change rates, even if your per hour rate is 400. Maybe for this client, you're making a case to only charge them $250. So you can just charge the 1 hour. I guess I'll have to update that real quick. So yeah, let me go ahead and make that quick change. It's not 0 hours, it's 1 hour. And right away, you notice some analytics around the total trust received, and you based on the projected effort put in. So you've got $250 plus taxes. That's in the province of Ontario. So Roger Moore is an Ontario lawyer. You've got $282. If you're not going to charge taxes, you can make this default tax rate as 0. Automatically specific to this file even, you can make this as a taxes exempt file. There you go, it's $250. For purposes of demo, let me just go back. Just delete that off. I'm just going to include HST as part of that in addition. That's how you start to capture all the information about this file within this matter. So you can go ahead and add a disbursement. This is where I said you could pay for disbursement both from trust as well as from general. If you're paying it off trust, you don't have to generate an invoice. You're just going to show that it's already been taken care of. So you could say, I've got $100 as a check that maybe it was a certified check or court fee paid to the Ministry of Finance, coming right off your trust account. You can even print that check in uLaw so that when you print this and leave the print, your check leaf on the printer, it would emboss right on top of it. So you've basically written a trust check to pay for a court fee, and you're going to notice this drop from 717 to 617. And here's what that check looks like. It's got the check details, it's got a couple of remittances at the bottom, and you can print this on a printer, and it would emboss right on top of it. You can even pay for disbursements from general account. So let's say you're paying, as I said, for, let's assume this is a mileage or unit rate. You can say for fax. So this is now going to automatically convert into a unit. You can say for 100 fax, charging it $1 fax. I'm going to say tax exempt. And because you are also a business accounting software, you can tell us whether you paid for this or if you actually went to Staples to do so. You can tell us how you paid for it. Maybe it was not tax exempt and you did pay the total amount, $113. Now right away you're going to see you've had one billable docket at 1 hour, a couple of disbursements, one out of trust, one out of general. You're going to see it's 100 plus the tax of 113. So at any time you can click on that to see what that is. Click on trust receipts to know where it is. You can generate invoices if you like. You can go ahead and generate a pre-bill. But for purpose of demo and time, I'm just going to go ahead and hit complete, which is how you generate an invoice. I'll skip the preview. I'll mark this as paid because there's still money left in trust so that they don't actually have to pay for it. And once I've invoiced, I can then go ahead and do the trust transfer for the amount to $282.50, right? Which is the 113 plus the 282. Okay? And here's the invoice. Next step in the process is you can actually complete this, add another docket, say final closure, and make this a flat rate, and continue to build that file. And once you've completed the file, of course, as we said, the next steps of the logical closure of these files would include, let me go ahead and invoice. You can start to generate all the next set of documents as you move them to closure around settlement of accounts, statement of activities, closure letter. That's all part of that templatization of these different documents that you need. Okay, so you can go ahead and generate right away once the work's done. As you can see, there's quite a few different templates that you could use. Even if you're using subcontracting, you could do that. But essentially, client matter, closing letter. Okay? Let's transfer that $900 so that you can do the appropriate trust transfer from the trust account into the general account. And all these documents that you can generate, of course, we've had a separate webinar on document management. You can either store it on the cloud, connected with uLaw and Dropbox or other cloud tools like Google Drive, or you can store them locally, whichever you feel fit. So I'm just going to say I did it through an electronic fund transfer, specifically in Ontario. You can even generate a Form 9A that will automatically pre-populate. It tells you clearly that it has the specific need. And here's even a closure letter that you can look at, because you know you've done all the work, you've got all the money, and you just have to accept maybe $4 of payment. So again, going back to the essence of today's webinar is really talking about matter management or file management, the ways of ensuring compliance, the ways that you can ensure that each piece of information that you capture is documented as and when things happen. Here's a simple template with all the information. And then once you've completed all of the different capturing of information, the various different documents that you can generate that are both compliant in nature as well as in terms of documents that you can generate to close the matter, right? If I were to quickly generate a settlement account, attach it along with my closure letter, I can do so. It pretty much tells me every step of the way what's happened with regards to this particular matter. There you go. It has the docket specifically. It has the description for the facts. It even has the retainer that was accepted, the date. It tells you any trust, other funds that were taken out of trust. It includes the HST involved with the different legal fees that you generated and the disbursements that there were. Any trust transfers that were made. Look at those three different trust transfers. 113 was for the disbursement itself. It's got everything. So this is a complete documentation of the work that was done in a representation that's compliant with the Law Society's requirements. Okay? Last but not the least, you can add parties, as I mentioned, and you can add Stefan here to this mix. Because this is Mr. Nishikori, who's our plaintiff. Let's assume he's our plaintiff. You can mark Stefan as the defendant. You can even add Stefan's legal professional who's representing him, if you like to. And then within uLaw, you have the court forms, and let's say this is small claims, and this is specific to Ontario. We're building forms for other provinces and should be available shortly. But let's say you're doing a plaintiff's claim in an Ottawa courthouse. You can just type in, we have all the information, and download it. We take all the information that's already available about the parties involved and populate it in the most recent updated form template governed by the jurisdiction, because we go and update this on a regular basis. And we put it together in a document that you can just take and run with. Spend minimal time updating it. And because this is automated, you can also be assured of the accuracy of the information. And there you go. It's already pre-populated and available for you, as much as information as we know, including the AKA of Mr. Nishikori. So with that, I'm going to wrap up this particular webinar. I'm going to stop the recording.